He's not dead. A waitress stopped the vampire king's funeral. What happened next shocked everyone. The castle was quiet, too quiet, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. The moon hung low in the sky, deep red, casting a strange light over the towering walls of the citadel. Inside, the halls were filled with people dressed in black. They moved silently, whispering in low tones as they prepared for the funeral of King Alaric, the vampire king who had ruled the lands for centuries. His death was said to be heroic, a final act in a battle against a group of rogue sorcerers who had threatened to destroy everything he had built. But not everyone believed in stories without proof. The massive hall was lined with marble pillars that seemed to touch the sky, flickering candles, casting small pools of light on the stone floor. The coffin was placed at the center on a raised platform, adorned with silver carvings and intricate symbols meant to honor the king's long life. The nobles, lords, and ladies of the court bowed their heads in solemn respect. Even in death, Alaric's presence seemed to command attention, as though his spirit lingered in the air, heavy and undeniable. In the midst of this, a young woman hurried through the gates, clutching a small basket of herbs she had been carrying. She was a mortal, a simple waitress named Leora. She worked in the castle kitchens, delivering meals to the servants and occasionally to the royal family. She had seen much in the castle, more than anyone would expect, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of the king lying as if dead. Her heart had skipped a beat when she noticed the faint pulse she believed she had seen just hours ago, a subtle shimmer of life in the king's chest when the battle was over. No one had listened to her then. But now, with the funeral about to begin, she knew she could not stay silent. Pushing her way past guards and startled servants, she entered the hall. Her voice trembled but was firm. "Wait, stop, the king, he's not dead." A hush fell over the room. Noblemen and women turned in surprise, eyes narrowing as they took in the sight of a mere mortal daring to interrupt the funeral of their king. Murmurs spread like wildfire. Some gasped in shock, others laughed nervously, unsure if they should take her words seriously. The chief priest, an elderly vampire named Valen, stepped forward, his long robes brushing the floor. His face was pale and lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, filled with authority. "What nonsense is this?" he asked, his voice echoing through the hall. "This is a sacred moment. How dare you interrupt?" Leora's hands shook, but she lifted them, holding up the small bundle of herbs she had brought. I saw him breathe. His heart, it was still beating. You're about to bury him alive." Gasps filled the hall again, louder this time. Some of the nobles murmured that she must be mad, a delusional girl trying to steal attention. Others, however, paused, curiosity mixing with doubt. They remembered the stories of King Alaric's unmatched power, of the many battles he had survived over centuries. Could death truly claim him so easily? The coffin was about to be opened by the pallbearers, their hands steady despite the tension in the room. Leora stepped forward, desperation clear in her eyes. "Please, just let me show you. I know he's alive. You have to believe me." Alaric's closest advisor, Lord Kalen, a tall vampire with sharp features and even sharper eyes, approached. He placed a restraining hand on Leora's shoulder. "Enough," he said coldly. "This woman speaks of nonsense. The king is gone. The court will honor his memory. Step aside." Leora shook him off. "No, you don't understand." "I saw him." Her voice rose, breaking the fragile calm of the room. "You can't just bury him like this. He's alive." For a moment, silence reigned again. Then, as the first pallbearer lifted the coffin lid, a small movement, a twitch, caught everyone's attention. Fingers stiffened and heads turned. A faint tremor passed through the coffin. Gasps erupted, and the hall erupted into chaos. Some nobles screamed that the girl had bewitched them. Others whispered about curses or signs of dark magic. The priest, Valen, raised his hands to restore order, but even he paused, eyes wide as he watched the coffin. Then the lid slammed shut again, as if by invisible hands hiding whatever had moved inside. The room was filled with tension, so thick that it seemed almost tangible. People leaned forward, fear and curiosity battling inside them. Leora's heart pounded. She knew she had been right, but she also knew that proving it would be far more dangerous than she had imagined. She took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the coffin. She had to find a way to show everyone the truth. King Alaric could not die, not like this. There was more to his story, more to the magic that bound him to this world, and she could feel it even now. His life force had not faded, it lingered, faint but unbroken. Whispers began to spread among the nobles. Could it be true? One asked. Could the king really still live? Another voice, this one colder, cut through the murmurs. She lies. A mere mortal cannot know what happens to a vampire king. Step aside or face the consequences. Leora stood her ground. Her fear had not vanished, but determination filled her chest. I am not lying, she said. I know what I saw, you have to trust me. For a moment no one moved. Then Lord Caelan, whose face had shown only doubt moments before, stepped back. He glanced at the priest, then at the assembly, a silent argument passing between them. The court was divided, and in that division Leora saw a small glimmer of hope. She took another step forward. If you open the coffin carefully, if you watch closely, you will see. He is not dead, he is still alive. Valen's eyes narrowed, the flicker of doubt crossing his face. The priest had served King Alaric for centuries and knew the man's power better than anyone. Could it be possible? Could death have missed the king, even in the final battle? The thought was almost unthinkable. The pallbearers hesitated, glancing at one another, unsure what to do. The nobles murmured, restless and tense. Leora's heart ached with fear that they might ignore her again, that she would fail to save the king she had never truly known but somehow felt connected to. And then, as if the castle itself held its breath, a faint sound came from the coffin. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh, a stirring of life. Leora's eyes widened. This was it, the proof she had prayed for. The room erupted in chaos. Some cried out in shock, others whispered prayers, and a few simply stared, unable to believe what they had seen. Leora's voice rang out above the noise. See, he is alive, you have to help him. Lord Caelan moved swiftly, placing himself between Leora and the coffin. His voice was firm, but there was uncertainty hidden beneath the surface. We must proceed carefully. If what she says is true, the king is not only alive but in danger. We cannot act rashly. Leora nodded, relief and fear mingling in her chest. This was only the beginning. She had saved him from the certainty of death, but now she had to protect him from the court, from those who would see him destroyed if they thought he was weak. And more than that, she had to face the truth of what had happened during the battle, the strange magic that had touched him, and the shadow that lingered over his survival. She took a step closer to the coffin, her hand trembling but her resolve steady. I will not let him die, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. Not like this, not now, not ever. And somewhere deep within the coffin, beneath the layers of marble and silver, a faint glimmer of recognition passed through King Alaric's eyes. He was alive. He was aware, and he was beginning to sense the presence of the mortal who had dared to defy the court, who had refused to let him be buried in silence. The hall was silent for a long moment, the tension so thick it pressed against the walls. Then a voice, quiet but commanding, spoke from somewhere deep in the shadows of the hall. This changes everything. No one knew who had said it. No one knew what it meant, but everyone could feel it. The kingdom, the court, and the world itself were about to be changed forever. And as the first pallbearer's hand hovered over the coffin again, uncertain and hesitant, the hall waited, trembling for what would come next. The moon outside shone even redder, as if it too had been drawn into the drama unfolding within the castle walls. And somewhere in the quiet corner of the hall, Leora's heart raced, for she knew that the story of the king, and of herself, was only beginning. The castle had fallen silent after the chaos in the great hall. The nobles were still whispering in small groups, uncertain whether to believe Leora or dismiss her as a delusional girl. But one thing was certain: King Alaric had not returned to the world of the living in full strength. He was trapped somewhere between life and death, a shadow of the powerful vampire he had once been. Leora knew she had no time to waste. If the court discovered the truth before she could act, the nobles would insist on burying him for a second time, or worse, performing a ritual that could destroy whatever remained of him. She had to move quickly, alone or with those few she could trust. She slipped quietly through the halls, avoiding guards who still lingered near the coffin, and descended a narrow spiral staircase that led to the old catacombs beneath the castle. The walls here were ancient, carved from stone centuries before Alaric had ascended to the throne. Dark magic lingered in the air, a faint hum that brushed against her senses like the whisper of a wind long forgotten. At the far end of the catacombs, she found what she was looking for: a hidden chamber, sealed with runes and symbols of protection. Only the loyal servants and trusted advisors of the king knew of this place. It was here, in the heart of the castle, that the true secrets of the vampire monarchy were kept, and where Alaric's life force was being held in fragile balance. Inside, Alaric lay on a raised stone platform, the faint glow of his pulse visible beneath his pale skin. His chest rose and fell ever so slightly, his body trembling as if it could not remember how to sustain itself. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and incense, intended to stabilize him, but it was clear that time was against them. "Your Majesty," Leora whispered, her voice trembling despite the courage she felt. She approached the platform slowly, careful not to disturb the fragile energy that surrounded him. His eyes fluttered open, revealing only a glimmer of recognition before they closed again. She could see the struggle in him, the fight to stay in the world of the living. A soft voice interrupted the quiet, one Leora recognized immediately. "Leave her be," it said. The voice was low, commanding, and filled with centuries of authority. Lord Caelan stepped forward from the shadows, his tall frame imposing, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern. She saw what happened. She claims she can help him. Leora turned to face him, determination in her gaze. "I can. I know the rituals, the herbs, everything I saw in the kitchens, everything the old records describe. I can restore him." Caelan hesitated. The boyish mortal had no formal training in the magical arts of the vampire court, yet there was something in her tone, a strength he could not deny. "You risk much," he said finally. "If you fail, it could destroy him entirely." "I'd rather risk it than watch him die," she replied firmly. "He has always protected this kingdom. Now it's our turn to protect him." Caelan's eyes softened, though the weight of centuries of wisdom made him slow to trust. Finally, he nodded, stepping aside. "Then do what you must. But remember, the king is not the same as he once was. His body is fragile, and the curse that lingers may resist every attempt." Leora knelt beside Alaric's stone platform, arranging the herbs she had brought with meticulous care. She murmured the words she had memorized from old tomes, blending them with the chants she had overheard in the castle archives. The air thickened, shimmering with energy as if the walls themselves responded to the attempt to bring the king back. Alaric's chest twitched again. His lips parted slightly, and a low, almost inaudible sound escaped him, like a sigh of relief. Leora felt a thrill of hope but knew better than to celebrate too soon. The king was still caught between life and death, and every second could tip him into the void. "You must trust me," she whispered, her hand hovering over his chest. "I won't let anything happen to you." His eyes opened fully this time, revealing amber gold irises that seemed to pierce her very soul. Recognition, confusion, and something darker flickered in them, memories she could not yet understand. Alaric's voice, weak but unmistakable, broke the silence. Why are you here?" he asked, his words a struggle. "I'm here to save you," she said softly. "You're alive, your majesty. You can't die here. Not like this. Not after everything." For a moment he said nothing, staring at her as if trying to remember her face, trying to understand why a mortal would risk herself for a king she barely knew. Then a shadow of a smile touched his lips. "You dare to defy the court for me?" "I dare because I care," she replied, feeling warmth in her chest despite the chill of the catacombs. "Because someone has to believe in you when no one else will." Alaric's hand twitched, reaching out instinctively but stopping short of her. His pride, centuries of strength, battled against the vulnerability forced upon him. He was not used to depending on anyone, least of all a mortal girl. Yet in the depths of his near-death state, he realized he had no choice. The ritual intensified. Leora chanted the words again, mixing them with the scent of crushed herbs and the touch of her hands over his chest. A glow began to emerge from Alaric's body, soft at first, then growing stronger. The shadows of the catacombs seemed to recede, leaving only the two of them bathed in a warm, ethereal light. And then, just as the energy reached its peak, a sudden tremor shook the chamber. The walls groaned as if the castle itself were protesting the restoration of its king. Leora stumbled but regained her balance, refusing to let fear overcome her. She pressed her hands more firmly against his chest, her voice rising in determination. "Stay with me, your majesty." "Fight, come back to us." Alaric's body convulsed slightly, a hiss escaping his lips as he struggled against the shadows holding him. His golden eyes locked with Leora's, and for the first time he seemed to see her, not as a mortal, not as a servant, but as someone essential, someone who had pulled him back from the edge of oblivion. Then a voice echoed in the chamber, deep and cold, carrying a tone of recognition that chilled Leora to the bone. "Alaric." The voice was smooth, familiar, and dripping with a mixture of anger and longing. Her heart skipped a beat. Alaric's eyes widened in shock and fear. "No, it cannot be," he whispered. "Not now, not here," Leora's brow furrowed. "Who is it?" she asked, though she feared the answer. The light around him flickered as his lips moved silently, forming a name she did not recognize. "Seraphine." The air grew heavier and the glow of Alaric's life force dimmed slightly. Leora felt a pang of fear. Whoever Seraphine was, she clearly held power over the king, a power that reached even into the rituals Leora performed. But she could not falter now. She tightened her grip on the herbs and continued her chants, her voice rising above the strange, haunting resonance in the chamber. Alaric's body trembled, and then slowly, imperceptibly, the tension eased. His chest rose and fell steadily, his pulse now strong enough to be seen with the naked eye. He opened his eyes fully and looked at Leora, a mixture of gratitude and confusion in his gaze. "You saved me," he said, his voice stronger now but still tinged with vulnerability. "Even with everything, even with her name on your lips." "I saved you because no one else would," Leora replied, "and because I believe there is more to your story than the court will ever see. You deserve to live, your majesty, and I will not let them take that from you." For a moment Alaric studied her, his golden eyes searching hers. He had ruled kingdoms, faced countless enemies, and survived centuries of battles, yet he had never encountered courage like hers. There was something pure, something unyielding in her presence that unsettled him and unexpectedly moved him. The chamber fell silent, the tension settling into a quiet understanding. Leora had performed the ritual, Alaric was alive. Yet the mention of Seraphine lingered like a shadow, a reminder that not all battles were over, that not all past ties had been severed. Alaric finally rose from the platform, still weak but standing, the strength of his presence returning slowly. He looked at Leora and spoke softly. "You've done more than save me. You've changed the course of everything." Leora nodded, exhausted but resolute. "We'll face whatever comes next together. You are not alone anymore." And in that quiet, ancient chamber, a bond began to form, one of trust, courage, and the promise of loyalty that would carry them into the trials yet to come. But outside the catacombs, in the shadows of the castle, the whispers had begun again. Someone was watching, waiting, and the name Seraphine was carried on the wind, a warning that the story of the king and the girl who dared to save him was far from over. The castle was no longer the same. Even after centuries of stability under King Alaric, whispers of his survival had spread like wildfire through the halls, twisting like vines around every throne, every noble, every servant. His return was no longer just a matter of life or death, it was a question of power. And Leora, the mortal who had dared to save him, had suddenly become a figure that both frightened and fascinated the court. Alaric stepped cautiously into the great hall. His presence, though weaker than before, still commanded attention. The nobles froze as he passed, their expressions a mixture of awe, suspicion, and fear. Some bowed too low, their heads nearly scraping the floor, while others lingered in their seats, their hands resting on their swords as if to test his resolve. The air was thick with tension, as though the castle itself waited to see how this fragile king would reclaim his authority. Leora followed close behind, her eyes scanning the room for danger. She had never imagined herself walking into a place like this, not as a servant, not as a mere observer, but as someone whose actions could shape the fate of an entire kingdom. She kept her head high, though her heart pounded in her chest. Every noble's glance felt like a challenge, every whisper a question about her place in this world she had barely entered. Alaric paused in the center of the hall, turning slowly to face his court. His voice, though quieter than it had been in life, carried the weight of centuries. "I am here," he said, and the room fell silent. "Alive, and I have returned not as a ruler in weakness, but as one who has seen the edge of oblivion. I will rule, but I will rule with truth. And I will not allow fear or ambition to rule in my absence." A few of the nobles stirred uneasily. One, Lord Merrick, a sharp-eyed vampire with a reputation for cunning, spoke from the far end of the hall. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing but keeping his gaze steady, "your return is unexpected. Yet we must ask, if you survived, why has it taken so long? And why is a mortal here with you?" Alaric's eyes flicked to Leora, and though his expression remained stoic, a faint acknowledgement passed between them. He spoke, voice calm but firm. "This mortal saved me when others doubted. Her courage is unmatched. I trust her, and you will do well to respect that trust, or you will answer to me." The hall was silent again, the weight of his words settling over everyone like a shadow. Leora felt a surge of both pride and fear. Pride that he recognized her, fear that the nobles' resentment might turn against her, and against the king who had trusted her. But the tension in the room was more than political. It was personal. Alaric could feel the pull of the past pressing against him, the memory of someone he had loved long before he had ascended to the throne. And now that figure, Lady Seraphine, the sorceress whose name had surfaced during his resurrection, threatened to return and complicate everything. The thought made his chest tighten, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his face that none of the nobles would see, except Leora. She noticed it immediately. Her pulse quickened, a strange warmth spreading through her as she realized the depth of the king's burden. She had saved him from death, but she could feel that the chains of his past were still wrapped tightly around his heart. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but she knew that even a mortal's touch could be dangerous in the eyes of the court. Instead, she stayed close, her presence a quiet support, a reminder that he was not alone. Alaric moved further into the hall, addressing the nobles again. "I will reclaim my throne fully, but I will do so with caution. There are forces at work that you cannot see, and enemies that lurk in shadows you do not know exist. Trust must be earned and loyalty tested. Those who seek only power will find their schemes undone." A few nobles murmured in approval, while others bristled at the implicit warning. Lord Kalen, standing near the back, gave Leora a subtle nod, acknowledging her role without drawing attention to her. She understood the gesture, and a small sense of relief washed over her. She had never sought recognition, but the king's acknowledgement felt like a quiet validation of everything she had risked. As the day wore on, Alaric began to address the practical matters of ruling. Decisions that had been delayed in his absence, disputes among the nobles and threats from rival clans, all required his attention. Leora followed him closely, carrying messages, observing the subtleties of court politics and learning quickly. Though she was mortal, her insight, bravery, and honesty allowed her to navigate a world that was alien in every way. Yet even amidst the courtly duties, moments of quiet intimacy passed between them. In the library, Alaric would ask Leora to read passages from old texts that contained knowledge of healing and magic. In the gardens, he would walk beside her, speaking softly about the challenges he faced as a ruler, the weight of immortality, and the loneliness of centuries. Each conversation deepened their connection, a bond formed from trust, mutual respect, and a subtle, unspoken longing. But the past would not remain buried. A shadow appeared at the edge of the court, a figure cloaked in dark robes, moving with deliberate purpose. Leora's heart skipped a beat when she recognized the faint shimmer of magic surrounding the figure. Lady Seraphine had returned. Her presence was a storm that threatened to unravel everything. Alaric's expression hardened, a mixture of anger, recognition, and old sorrow flickering across his face. "Seraphine," he murmured, his voice low, "you should not have come." Seraphine's eyes gleamed beneath the hood and her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. "You were not meant to live," she said, voice like silk and steel intertwined. "Yet here you are, and you are not alone. How intriguing." Leora felt a shiver run down her spine. The sorceress's words were more than a threat, they were a challenge. Alaric stepped protectively in front of her, the centuries of experience in his stance radiating strength even in his weakened state. "You will not harm her," he said, his voice firm. "Not while I draw breath." Seraphine's laugh was soft, musical, but edged with malice. "Oh, I do not seek to harm her, yet, but she is entwined in your fate now, Alaric, and fate is not always kind." The court watched in stunned silence, unsure how to respond. Some feared the sorceress, others feared the consequences of crossing her. But Alaric remained unwavering, his gaze locked on her, protective and resolute. Leora felt a strange mixture of fear and courage. She knew the coming days would test everything she had learned, everything she believed about loyalty, love, and trust. Yet in that moment, standing beside the king she had saved, she felt an unspoken promise forming, a promise that they would face these trials together, no matter the cost. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the castle walls, the tension in the court did not diminish. The nobles whispered among themselves, some plotting, others speculating. Every step Alaric took, every glance he exchanged with Leora, carried the weight of centuries and the spark of a bond that neither time nor magic could easily sever. The first night back in the castle after his return was restless. Alaric paced the high towers, his mind filled with strategy, memories, and the faint, persistent shadow of Seraphine. Leora followed, silent but steady, offering guidance where she could, her hand brushing against his arm in a gesture of quiet support. "Why did she return?" Leora asked softly, her voice almost a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might summon danger. Alaric's eyes darkened with memory and regret. "Because some debts are never forgotten," he said. "Because love and anger, even after centuries, can linger like a wound that refuses to heal." Leora nodded, understanding more than he realized. She had seen the traces of his past in the hesitation of his movements, the flicker of pain in his eyes, and the way he measured every word he spoke in court. The king she had saved was not only a ruler but a man haunted by centuries of decisions, battles, and relationships that time had never allowed him to forget. That night, the castle was quiet, but tension lay thick in the air. Every shadow seemed to whisper secrets. Every flicker of candlelight hinted at unseen dangers. Alaric and Leora sat together in a hidden alcove. The world outside paused, if only for a moment. "We will need to face her," Alaric said finally, voice low and deliberate. "She will not be ignored, and neither will the court. There is danger in every direction." Leora reached out, placing her hand over his. "Then we face it together," she said simply. Alaric looked at her, the weight of centuries pressing down, and yet in that gaze there was a glimmer of something he had thought lost: trust, hope, and a connection deeper than any command or title could provide. And somewhere in the shadows of the castle, Lady Seraphine watched, her eyes glinting with the promise of a storm yet to come. The path ahead would be perilous, filled with intrigue, danger, and tests of loyalty. But Alaric and Leora, bound now by courage and the secret of a life saved, would not face it alone. The first whispers of dawn touched the castle towers, the light catching on stone and glass, signaling the beginning of a new day, and a new chapter in a story of power, trust, and a bond that would be tested like never before. The castle was cloaked in a storm that night. Lightning cut through the sky, illuminating the high towers in brief, violent flashes. Rain pelted the stone walls, and the wind moaned through the corridors as if warning the inhabitants of what was to come. Alaric stood at the top of the highest tower, gazing out at the horizon, the fury of the storm reflecting the turmoil in his heart. Leora stood beside him, her cloak soaked and hair plastered to her face, but her eyes were steady, unwavering. "The storm is nothing compared to what awaits us," Alaric said, voice low but commanding. His golden eyes reflected lightning, bright and piercing. "Seraphine will not hold back. She knows I survived, and she will stop at nothing to reclaim what she believes belongs to her." Leora's hand found his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that carried unspoken reassurance. "Then we face it together," she said, her voice strong despite the pounding of her heart. "Whatever comes, we face it as one." Alaric turned to her, studying her face, the mortal who had defied the court, defied death itself, and had risked everything to save him. There was something in her courage, something unyielding that made him realize the depth of his own feelings, not just gratitude but trust, respect, and a bond that had been forged in fire and fear. The doors to the tower opened suddenly, and Lord Caelan entered, his face grim. "Seraphine approaches," he said. "She is not alone. There are sorcerers with her, dark forces that will not hesitate to strike at anyone who opposes her." Alaric nodded. "Then we have no time to waste. Gather those who are loyal, prepare the wards and the rituals. This ends tonight." Leora followed him down the spiral staircases into the catacombs, where the oldest magic of the castle lay waiting. Torches flickered, casting long shadows on the walls, making the corridors seem alive. The air smelled of wet stone and herbs, a mix of life and death. Here they would face the ultimate challenge, the battle not just of strength, but of heart, trust, and sacrifice. At the chamber's center, Alaric began the preparations for a protective ritual, one that could repel Seraphine's magic and secure the kingdom. Leora helped him, carefully arranging herbs, chanting incantations she had memorized, and holding steady as the room hummed with energy. Every motion, every whispered word strengthened the wards, but she could feel the pull of Seraphine's power reaching toward them like a shadow seeking warmth. Minutes felt like hours. Then, in a flash of dark light, the sorceress appeared in the chamber, flanked by her followers. Her eyes gleamed with power and purpose, and her smile was calm, almost gentle, though there was a menace underneath it. "Alaric," she said softly, her voice echoing as if carried from a distant place, "you have survived, yet your soul is not entirely yours. And you stand beside her, a mortal. How interesting." Alaric stepped forward, his posture unwavering despite the storm of magic around him. "I have survived," he said, "and she stands beside me because she saved my life. You will not harm her." Seraphine tilted her head, studying Leora carefully. "Brave, foolish, or both," she said. "Very well. Let us see if your bond is strong enough to withstand what comes next." The air crackled with energy, the walls of the chamber vibrating with the clash of their wills. Leora could feel the pull of Seraphine's magic, a cold, insistent force trying to unravel everything they had built. Alaric raised his hands, channeling his own power, and the room glowed with golden light that pushed back the shadows. "You must trust me," Alaric said, turning to Leora. "Do exactly as I say. This ritual requires both of us." Leora nodded, steadying herself, repeating the chants aloud, letting her voice carry strength and intent into the room. She could feel the magic of the castle responding, the stones themselves lending their energy to the ritual. The air thickened, a tangible force pressing against her skin, but she did not falter. Seraphine's laughter echoed, dark and musical. "Do you think you can defy me?" she said. "You are bound by mortality, and yet you touch immortality. How touching!" Alaric's gaze hardened. "Strength does not come from immortality alone. It comes from courage, from loyalty, from love. And that is something you will never understand." With a sudden motion, Seraphine unleashed a wave of dark magic. The chamber trembled, torches flickering violently. Leora stumbled but held her ground, focusing on the ritual and on Alaric's presence beside her. They were connected now, their energy intertwined, and together their power surged against the darkness. Alaric's voice rang out, commanding and firm. "Focus! Hold the wards! We will not falter!" The clash intensified. Shadows twisted and clawed at the edges of the chamber, but the light from the ritual expanded, forming a protective barrier that shimmered like liquid gold. Leora felt exhaustion creeping in, her body trembling, but she drew strength from Alaric's resolve and the trust that had grown between them over the past days. And then, Seraphine stepped forward, her eyes locking on Alaric's. "This is not over," she said softly, almost sorrowfully. "There are debts, old loves, and unfinished fates. One day they will claim you." Alaric advanced toward her, his golden light pushing back the darkness, his voice low but unwavering. "Not today, not ever. The past may linger, but it will not control the present. You are done." With that, the final surge of energy erupted. The wards flared, the sorceress's magic met its match, and the chamber was filled with brilliant, blinding light. When the glow faded, Seraphine and her followers were gone, vanished into the shadows from which they had come, leaving silence in their wake. Alaric and Leora stood together, breathing heavily, hearts pounding. They had survived the storm, the magic, and the shadows. They had faced the past and emerged stronger, their bond solidified by courage, trust, and shared struggle. Leora looked at Alaric, her eyes reflecting both relief and awe. "We did it," she whispered, almost disbelievingly. Alaric smiled faintly, the weight of centuries momentarily lifting from his shoulders. "Yes," he said, "but not alone. You were here with me, and that makes all the difference." For the first time, Alaric allowed himself to feel not only gratitude but genuine closeness to another. Leora had risked everything for him, and in doing so had changed the course of his life, the kingdom, and perhaps even his heart. They returned to the castle above, where the storm had begun to calm. The halls were quiet, the nobles cautiously observing, unsure how to respond. Alaric addressed them, his voice strong and calm, carrying authority tempered with wisdom. "Today we faced more than enemies," he said. "We faced fear, doubt, and shadows from the past, but we emerged victorious, not because of strength alone, but because of trust, courage, and unity. Let this be a lesson. Loyalty and courage are greater than any power, greater than any magic." The nobles bowed their heads, some in respect, others in cautious acknowledgement. Leora remained near the king, her presence a quiet reminder that bravery could come from the most unexpected places. Days passed, and the kingdom slowly healed. Alaric regained his full strength, walking through the castle with a renewed sense of purpose. Leora remained by his side, not as a servant but as a trusted ally, her courage and insight now recognized by the court. Yet even as peace returned, the memory of Seraphine lingered, a reminder that not all threats were gone, and that the past could reach out at any moment. But Alaric and Leora had learned that together they could face anything, because their bond was stronger than fear, stronger than doubt, stronger than even the shadows that haunted the edges of the world. One evening, as the sun set over the castle towers, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Alaric and Leora stood together on the balcony, looking out over the kingdom they had fought to protect. "You saved me," Alaric said quietly, his hand brushing hers. "But more than that, you taught me to trust again. You reminded me that life is not only about power or immortality, it is about connection, loyalty, and hope." Leora smiled softly. "And you reminded me that courage is more than facing danger. It's standing by those you care for, even when the world doubts you." Alaric turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dying light of the sun. "Then we continue together," he said, voice firm, carrying the weight of his centuries and the promise of a new beginning. "Yes," she replied, "together." And as the last rays of sunlight touched the castle towers, the kingdom felt a sense of calm and renewal. The storms had passed, the shadows had been held at bay, and two souls, one mortal, one immortal, had found strength, trust, and perhaps even love, in a world filled with danger, magic, and the echoes of the past. The future remained uncertain. There would always be challenges, old debts, and enemies waiting in the shadows. But Alaric and Leora now knew the greatest power they possessed, the bond they had forged in the darkness, a bond that could withstand anything the world might throw at them. And somewhere, far beyond the castle walls, the faintest whisper of magic stirred in the air, as if hinting that the story was not over, only beginning a new chapter.